Hi. So to further our discussion on talking about populations, I wanted to talk a little bit about limiting factors. So first, one of the concepts that we come into when we talk about limiting factors is carrying capacity. So carrying capacity refers to the maximum population an ecosystem can support indefinitely. So this literally just means ecosystems have limited resources. We know that they have limited food, limited water, things like that. So it can only sustain so much life within it. And again, if we think back to our different biomes, how much life it can support is going to depend greatly on the types of resources available for certain environments. A desert cannot support as much life as a rainforest by comparison. It can be difficult to measure carrying capacity as ecosystems change. So for ones that go through lots of seasonal changes, especially if we're thinking about here through most of the US, where we're talking about temperate environments, where we go through changes when we go through spring, summer, fall, and winter. Again, it can be tough to track how carrying capacity works because it's going to fluctuate a little bit within the course of a year. Another part that we look at with carrying capacity are population crashes. So when the resources run out for a population, it can cause the population to take a nosedive. If there are too many individual animals and not enough resources to go around, it can cause a crash. And so the example that I want to show you actually involves reindeer. This is a picture of some reindeer. So this graph is from the St. Matthew Island reindeer population. And again, we're looking at it from 1944 to a little bit past 1976 as far as how this graph measures. So we see the reindeer population, again, started out very low. Our carrying capacity is this dotted line here where it says estimated K. This is where the carrying capacity was level. There was enough resources for all the individuals here. So we saw this steady incline in the reindeer population. And again, we're talking about an island. So the amount of resources is limited. It's just whatever is on the island. If you introduce reindeer onto the island, they're going to graze on what they graze on, but they can't swim very easily from one island to another. And even then, when they do, we start talking about differences in population at that point. So they go on this steady incline. And then when we get here to about 1960, we see that we've got a significant spike over our carrying capacity. We're getting too many reindeer, not enough resources. Population goes up and up and up and up, and then it gets to be too much. 6,000 reindeer, and then bam, huge nosedive. The population drops really quickly. And it drops so much that we're all the way back down here at 1968 to just 42 reindeer. And it's hard to recover the numbers back up after that point because you've got so few animals on the island at that point. Whereas it was over 1,000 that would have been at a steady carrying capacity. So it's tough whenever we see these fluctuations in it. These are the types of things that ecologists study to check out how stable populations are. So this gets us into exactly what is a limiting factor. A species is at carrying capacity when it consumes a resource at the same rate as the ecosystem produces the resource. So if we think here about our wildebeest here in the savanna, as long as the grass is being produced at a steady rate, it can support this population of wildebeest. Like we talked before in savanna environments that just basically have a wet and a dry season, if the dry season comes in, there's not enough grass to sustain this population. They have to migrate, they have to move on, or they won't be able to survive. Limiting factors are the resources that limit population growth and determine population decline. So again, we think about things like food, water, space, temperature, all of these things that organisms rely on to survive, but that the organisms themselves aren't in control of. I want you to understand that limiting factors do include types of things like food resources. They do not include things that just kill the animals outright. Predators are not a limiting factor. Hunters, not a limiting factor. Disease, not a limiting factor. It sounds like they would be because those are things that kill them. But limiting factors are things that organisms depend on to survive. If they're not there, those organisms will die out. But the organisms want limiting factors to be around. So I want you to take a little bit of time to consider these different populations and what are the limiting factors for these populations. So you can pause the video as you're going through these, consider them for a minute. What are the limiting factors for this population? We've got, again, a pride of lions in this one. Think about what are the resources that they need in order to survive in their environment. What are the things that they depend on? And I'm going to go through a few different examples here. So like I said, you can pause on each one if you want to take a little time to think about it. So here we've got a stand of trees. Again, think about what are the limiting factors for this population? Are there some similarities to the population of lions, or is it different? We have a few different examples. So think about what limiting factors will they have in common? What limiting factors are going to be a little bit different for these populations? Here we've got a population of deer, and as you can tell by the picture, these are deer that are dealing with a colder time of the year. It's a wintertime environment. What are the limiting factors for this population of deer? Think about what they need in order to survive. And here we've got a population of mushrooms. Again, what are the limiting factors? What are the things that they depend on for survival? Especially think about the places where you see mushrooms grow. They don't just grow anywhere. They grow in specific areas where the nutrients that they need are present. Think about their roles when we talked about, again, those types of processes when we talk about geochemical cycles and the role that decomposers play in them. Mushrooms are a type of decomposer. What do they depend on in the environment to decompose? Okay, so after taking those into consideration, I also want you to think about density dependent versus density independent causes of death. Causes of death in a population may or may not be due to population density. So if we look here at our picture, we've got a population of monkeys, a troop of monkeys. These are generally animals that stay close together. Their population is dense. If we think back to our dispersions and we think about clumped, they usually stay really close together. Staying close together can protect animals, but can also harm them when we start talking about density-dependent deaths. Density-dependent deaths occur more quickly in a crowded population than in a spread-out population. So some examples of things that could cause those types of deaths are limited resources. So if there's not enough food or water to go around, predation. So when predators take down animals in a crowded population, they have a much easier time of it when they're all close together, as long as they can't really defend themselves very easily that way. And disease. Again, think about how easily disease spreads whenever we're in close contact with each other as opposed to when we're far away. Density-independent deaths occur regardless of the size of a population because it affects all members of the population uniformly. So that's the second type that we look at, density-independent deaths. So these are ones that occur due to things like severe weather or natural disasters. So an earthquake, a hurricane, a heat wave coming through. They're things that it wouldn't matter if you were 100 feet away. As long as that heat wave is still affecting that area, it could still harm organisms in that area. It doesn't matter if the population is close together or far apart. If we think about those other dispersions like even dispersion or random dispersion, density-independent deaths are going to hurt those populations even if they're spread out like that. So what I want you to do again is consider some of these examples, and like I said, you can take time in the video to pause it to think about which type of factor is at play here. Is this a density-dependent factor or a density-independent factor that's causing this death? So frogs in a pond are getting infected with a fungus. This is something that happens a lot to amphibian populations. Chytrid fungus is something that transfers very easily. So if we're thinking about frogs in a pond getting infected with a fungus, is this density-dependent or density-independent? Think about that for a minute. Here with this example, chrysanthemums in a field are dying from an early frost. Is this one density dependent? Does it depend on how close together the flowers are? Or is it density independent to where it doesn't matter how close or far apart they are? A school of spawning salmon is being eaten by bears. Again, think about it. Is this density dependent, where it hurts more if the population is close together? Or is it density independent to where it would hurt them regardless of how far apart they're spread? A flock of wild turkeys starts to die off from avian influenza. So if you've heard of AI or bird flu, that's what we're talking about here. And this is something that can happen to both domestic turkeys and wild turkeys. So if a group of them start to die off from flu, again, a type of disease that's spreading, is this one a density-dependent death? Is it dependent on how close they are together, or is it density-independent? Would it hurt them even if they were spread really far apart? Here's another scenario. A flood drowns several badgers in their burrows. Is this something that would be density dependent, where if they're close together it will hurt them? Or is it density independent? Does it not matter how far out they're spread, that the flood will still get them? Another example here. A forest of elm trees starts to die off from Dutch elm disease. So again, we're talking about a specific type of disease in this instance, and this is one that really only affects certain types of trees. So again, we're thinking about this population of elm trees. So is this a density dependent cause of death? Does it matter that they're close together? Or is it density independent? It would still hurt them no matter how far out they're spread. And then finally, if we look here at rising heat temperatures cause mushrooms in a field to dry out. Is this something that would be a density dependent factor? Again, if they're very close together, it would hurt them more. Or is it density independent? Would it not matter if the mushrooms were spread out super duper far? It could still hurt them in this sort of scenario, and they would still die regardless of that. So again, take time when you're watching this video, pause it, consider your answers, and look back at the definitions to help you figure out whether or not these are density dependent or independent causes of death. And again, thinking back to limiting factors, again, those are things that organisms depend on to survive. Things like food, water, space, talking about things like temperature as well. Think about those factors when we're talking about populations.